The heat clung to Atlanta like a second skin. Even at 2 in the morning, the August air refused to relent, thick and heavy with humidity that made every breath feel earned. The city's skyline shimmered against the darkness, lights from 1,000 windows creating a constellation of sleepless souls. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded, swallowed by the urban sprawl that never truly slept. Lieutenant Sarah Collins guided her unmarked SUV through the empty streets, the air conditioning working overtime against the oppressive warmth outside. In the back, secured in his specialized compartment, K-9 Max sat alert, his pointed ears rotating like satellite dishes picking up signals invisible to human perception. The Belgian Malinois had been restless since they left the precinct, something in the night air triggering his instincts. Sarah glanced at the dashboard clock. The call had come 40 minutes ago, routed through channels that suggested discretion was paramount. An anonymous tip about Grady Memorial Hospital, one of the largest medical centers in the Southeast. Someone inside was allegedly running a pipeline of controlled substances out of the facility, feeding a network that distributed to dealers across the metropolitan area. The department had been tracking unusual patterns in pharmaceutical theft for months, but this was the first solid lead pointing to an inside operation. The hospital rose ahead, a massive complex of interconnected buildings that sprawled across several city blocks. Emergency lights bathed the main entrance in harsh red and white, ambulances parked in neat rows waiting for the next crisis. Sarah bypassed the emergency department, following the service road toward a side entrance where hospital security had agreed to meet them. She parked in a spot reserved for law enforcement, killed the engine, and sat for a moment studying the building. Grady Memorial operated around the clock, a small city unto itself with thousands of employees, patients, and visitors moving through its corridors at any given hour. Finding one person among that population, someone who had learned to blend in perfectly, would require patience and precision. Max whined softly from the back, eager to work. Sarah stepped out into the sweltering night, the heat immediately pressing against her like a physical force. She moved to the rear of the vehicle and opened the compartment, and Max leaped down with practiced grace, his paws silent on the pavement. He wore his working harness, the black tactical vest that signaled he was on duty. His tongue lolled briefly as he adjusted to the temperature, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning their surroundings with the focus of a seasoned professional. A security guard emerged from a nearby door, his uniform dark with sweat stains despite the hour. He was an older man, heavy-set, with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much during too many night shifts. "I am Gerald Patterson," he said, extending a hand. "Head of night security." We spoke on the phone. Sarah shook his hand firmly. "Lieutenant Collins, this is Max. We appreciate your cooperation in keeping this quiet." Gerald nodded, glancing nervously at the dog. "The hospital administrator is not thrilled about this, but after I showed him the warrant, he agreed to let you operate with minimal interference. Most of the staff does not know you are here. We have told the few who noticed that you are conducting a routine security assessment." "That works," Sarah said. "Walk me through the layout. Where are the pharmacy storage areas?" Gerald produced a folded map from his pocket, spreading it against the hood of Sarah's vehicle. "The main pharmacy is here, on the second floor of the central building. But we have satellite storage throughout the complex. Each floor of the main hospital has a medication room. The surgical wing has its own pharmacy. The emergency department maintains a separate stock. And then there are the research labs on the 7th floor. They keep some experimental compounds up there." Sarah studied the map, committing the layout to memory. Her informant had suggested the theft was happening during the night shift, when oversight was minimal and the chaos of emergency admissions provided cover. The substances being taken were specific, opioids primarily, but also sedatives and certain medications with high street value. "Who has access to these areas?" she asked. Gerald sighed. "That is the problem. Hundreds of people, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, technicians. We have electronic locks and logging systems, but someone who knows the procedures could find ways around them. Medications go missing in hospitals all the time. Small amounts easily explained as waste or documentation errors. but the pattern your department identified suggests something more organized. Sarah folded the map and tucked it into her vest. We will start with the main pharmacy and work outward. I need you to continue your normal rounds. Do not alert anyone to our presence unless absolutely necessary. If we find something, I will contact you immediately. Gerald hesitated. Should I be worried about danger? I mean, whoever is doing this, if they are cornered. Sarah met his eyes steadily. Let us handle any confrontation. Your job is to keep the hospital running normally. Can you do that? He nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his expression. Yes, ma'am. I will be on my radio if you need me. Sarah watched him disappear back through the service entrance, then turned to Max. The dog sat at her heel, awaiting instruction. She knelt beside him, running a hand along his sleek coat. The familiar ritual grounded her, reminded her of the partnership they had built over years of working together. Okay, partner, she murmured. Let us go find some bad guys. Max's tail wagged once, a brief acknowledgement, and then he was all business again. Sarah led him through the service entrance into the bowels of the hospital. The corridor was utilitarian here, bare concrete floors and exposed pipes, a stark contrast to the polished public areas. They passed laundry carts piled with soiled linens, industrial washing machines humming behind closed doors, storage rooms stacked with supplies, the hospital's hidden infrastructure, the machinery that kept the visible operations running smoothly. They took a service elevator to the second floor, emerging into a quieter hallway that connected to the main building. Here the environment shifted, carpeted floors muffling their footsteps, artwork on the walls attempting to soften the institutional atmosphere. A few staff members passed, offering tired nods without questioning Sarah's presence. Her uniform commanded automatic respect, and Max's harness identified him as a working dog. Most people knew better than to interfere with K-9 operations. The main pharmacy was secured behind a set of double doors with electronic locks. Sarah had the access codes provided by hospital administration, and she entered them carefully, waiting for the green light before pushing through. Inside, the pharmacy resembled a high-tech warehouse, rows of shelving units stretching toward the ceiling, automated dispensing machines blinking with status lights, a central workstation where a lone pharmacist sat reviewing orders on multiple monitors. The pharmacist looked up as they entered, surprise flickering across his face before settling into professional composure. He was young, maybe 30, with wire-rimmed glasses and the pallid complexion of someone who spent most of his time under fluorescent lights. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of suspicion. Sarah approached the workstation, badge visible on her chest. "Lieutenant Collins, Atlanta PD. This is K-9 Max. We are conducting a security assessment. I will need access to your inventory logs for the past 6 months." The pharmacist blinked. "That is a lot of data. Do you have authorization?" Sarah produced the warrant, watching his reaction carefully. The pharmacist examined it, his expression unreadable, then handed it back with a shrug. "I will pull the records. It might take a few minutes." While he worked at his computer, Sarah gave Max the signal to search. The dog moved through the pharmacy with methodical precision, nose working the air, checking each aisle, each shelf, each storage container. His training covered multiple detection scenarios: explosives, drugs, weapons. In this environment, he was calibrated for pharmaceutical compounds, specifically the synthetic signatures of opioids and controlled substances. Sarah watched him work while keeping one eye on the pharmacist. The man seemed genuinely focused on retrieving the requested data, his fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. Either he was innocent, or he was an excellent actor. Max completed his sweep and returned to Sarah's side, sitting to indicate a negative result. Nothing out of place here, at least nothing that triggered his alerts. The main pharmacy appeared clean. "Here are the logs," the pharmacist said, swiveling a monitor toward her. "I have flagged the controlled substances as you requested. We track every milligram from delivery to dispensation. Any discrepancies are investigated and documented." Sarah scrolled through the data, noting the meticulous record-keeping. If someone was stealing from this pharmacy, They were doing it in ways that left no obvious trail. Small quantities, perhaps, attributed to spillage or patient emergencies. Death by 1,000 cuts. "Do you work every night shift?" she asked. The pharmacist nodded. 4 nights a week, Sunday through Wednesday. Thursday through Saturday, my colleague David handles things. And the satellite pharmacies? Who manages those? Depends on the unit. The medication rooms on each floor are stocked by us, but the nurses handle distribution to patients. The surgical pharmacy has its own staff. It is a complicated system. Sarah thanked him and led Max back into the corridor. The hospital's complexity was both its strength and its vulnerability. So many access points, so many people with legitimate reasons to handle controlled substances. Finding the leak would require patience. They spent the next hour methodically checking the satellite locations. Each medication room followed a similar pattern: locked cabinets, electronic logs, limited access. Max searched each one thoroughly, his focus unwavering despite the late hour and the oppressive warmth that even the hospital's air conditioning could not entirely dispel. In the surgical wing, they encountered more activity. An emergency procedure was underway, the operating room's lights visible through a small window, as a team worked to save someone's life. Sarah and Max skirted the area, not wanting to interfere, and made their way to the surgical pharmacy. It was smaller than the main facility, but equally well organized, staffed by a serious-looking woman in her 50s, who examined Sarah's warrant with the thoroughness of a lawyer. "We run a tight ship here," the woman said. "Any discrepancy would be flagged immediately. My staff knows the consequences of improper handling." "Have there been any flags recently?" Sarah asked. The woman hesitated. "Nothing significant. A few instances of medications being returned after procedures were canceled. Routine stuff." Sarah noted the hesitation. "Could you show me those records?" The woman compiled the information, and Sarah reviewed it carefully. Most of the entries seemed legitimate. Medications prepared for surgeries that were postponed, or patients who were discharged before their procedures. But one entry caught her attention: a notation about missing vials of fentanyl, attributed to a documentation error that was subsequently corrected. "Who was responsible for this correction?" Sarah asked, pointing to the entry. The woman leaned in to look. "That would be..." "Let me check. It was handled by the night supervisor, a nurse named Diane Mercer." Sarah made a mental note of the name. "Is she working tonight?" "I believe so, yes. She covers the East Wing, floors 4 through 6. Sarah thanked the woman and led Max back into the corridor. They had a name now, a starting point. It might be nothing, a simple paperwork error as the record suggested, or it might be the thread that unraveled the entire operation. The East Wing was quieter than the surgical area, its floors dedicated to long-term recovery and observation. Patients here were stable, requiring less intensive monitoring, which meant fewer staff members on duty during the night shift. Sarah and Max moved through the 4th floor first, checking the medication room and speaking briefly with the nurse on duty, a young man who seemed more interested in the dog than in answering questions. "Max is beautiful," the nurse said, reaching out tentatively. "Can I pet him?" "He is working right now," Sarah replied. "Maybe another time. Do you know Diane Mercer?" The nurse nodded. "Sure, she is the night supervisor. Usually makes rounds about this time, checking on all the floors under her responsibility. Where would I find her? Probably on 6. That is where her office is." Sarah thanked him and headed for the elevators. As they ascended, she noticed Max's posture changing. His ears perked forward, his nostrils flaring as he sampled the air inside the elevator car. Something had caught his attention. The doors opened on the 6th floor, and Max immediately pulled toward the left corridor. Sarah let him lead, trusting his instincts. They passed several patient rooms, doors closed, monitors beeping softly behind them. The floor was dimly lit, nighttime protocols reducing the harsh fluorescent glare to something more conducive to sleep. Max stopped outside a utility closet, his body rigid with alertness. He sniffed at the gap beneath the door, then sat back on his haunches, the signal that indicated a positive hit. Something behind that door had triggered his training. Sarah tried the handle. Locked. She keyed her radio, contacting hospital security. "Patterson, I need access to a utility closet on the 6th floor, East Wing. Can you send someone with keys?" The response came quickly. "On my way." While waiting, Sarah examined the closet door. Standard hospital issue, designed more for privacy than security. A determined person could force it, but doing so would create noise and attract attention. Better to wait for the proper access. Gerald arrived within minutes, slightly out of breath from hurrying. He sorted through a ring of keys, found the right one, and unlocked the door. Sarah gestured for him to step back, then eased the door open carefully. Inside, the closet contained standard supplies, cleaning materials, spare linens, maintenance equipment. But Max pushed past Sarah, zeroing in on a large laundry bin tucked in the corner. He pawed at the bin, whining softly, his signal intensifying. Sarah pulled on latex gloves and approached the bin. Beneath a layer of dirty towels, she found a thermal bag, the kind used to transport temperature-sensitive items. She unzipped it carefully and found rows of medication vials, neatly arranged in foam padding. Fentanyl, morphine, hydrocodone. A small fortune in controlled substances ready for transport. "Get the hospital administrator on the phone," Sarah told Gerald. "We are going into lockdown." The next 30 minutes were controlled chaos. Sarah coordinated with hospital administration and the Atlanta PD, implementing a carefully planned protocol designed to secure the facility without causing panic. All exits were quietly sealed, security personnel stationed at key points, staff movements monitored without being openly restricted. The goal was to contain the situation, while identifying everyone who had access to the 6th floor utility closet. Backup units arrived, detectives and uniformed officers who fanned out through the hospital with specific assignments. Sarah briefed them quickly, sharing what they knew and what they suspected. The thermal bag suggested someone was planning to move the medications out of the building, probably during the shift change, when staff coming and going would provide cover. Max remained at Sarah's side as she worked, his presence a steady anchor amid the swirling activity. He had done his job, locating the contraband. Now it was up to the humans to follow the trail to its source. Diane Mercer became the immediate focus. Sarah had officers locate her discreetly, bringing her to an empty conference room for questioning. The woman who entered was not what Sarah expected. Mid-40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing scrubs that had seen better days. She looked tired, worn down by years of demanding work, not like someone running a criminal operation. "Ms. Mercer," Sarah said, gesturing to a chair, "please sit down. I have some questions about your duties here at the hospital." Diane sat, her expression wary but not hostile. "Am I in some kind of trouble?" Sarah studied her carefully. "That depends on your answers. Can you tell me about your responsibilities as night supervisor?" Diane relaxed slightly, the question seeming to put her at ease. "I oversee nursing operations on floors 4 through 6 during the night shift. Patient care, medication administration, staff coordination. I have been doing this for 12 years. And part of your job involves handling controlled substances?" "Of course. Nurses administer medications prescribed by physicians. Everything is logged and documented." Sarah nodded. "I found something interesting in the surgical pharmacy records. A discrepancy involving fentanyl vials, corrected by you several weeks ago. Can you explain that?" Diane's expression flickered, something passing behind her eyes too quickly to identify. "Discrepancies happen. Paperwork errors, miscounts during inventory. When I find them, I investigate and make corrections. That is part of my job." The correction attributed the missing vials to documentation error, but the vials were not actually missing, were they? They were taken. Diane's posture stiffened. "I do not know what you are implying." Sarah leaned forward. "Let me be direct, Ms. Mercer. We found a cache of controlled substances hidden in a utility closet on your floor. Fentanyl, morphine, and other medications with significant street value. These drugs were staged for removal from the hospital. Someone with access to that closet. Someone who knows the night shift routines. Someone who can cover discrepancies in the records." Diane's face paled, but her voice remained steady. I did not do this, then who did? The question hung in the air. Diane looked down at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. Sarah waited, recognizing the internal struggle of someone confronting a difficult decision. Finally, Diane spoke. There are things happening in this hospital that I have suspected but could not prove. People I have questioned but could not accuse. If I tell you what I know, I need assurance that my career will not be destroyed based on speculation. Sarah considered this carefully. If you have information relevant to this investigation, sharing it is the right thing to do. I cannot make promises about outcomes, but I can tell you that cooperating with law enforcement is always viewed more favorably than obstruction. Diane took a deep breath. There is a group. I do not know how many are involved, but I know it is more than one person. They have been operating for months, maybe longer. Small thefts carefully disguised to avoid detection. I noticed patterns, medications going missing during specific shifts, documentation errors that always seemed to resolve themselves. When I tried to investigate, I was warned to mind my own business. Warned by whom? Diane hesitated. One of the other supervisors, Marcus Webb. He oversees the emergency department staff. He told me that I was imagining things, that if I kept asking questions, I would regret it. Sarah made a note of the name. Did you take his warning seriously? He made it very clear, Diane said quietly. I have a daughter in college. I cannot afford to lose this job. So I stopped asking questions and tried to pretend I did not see what I was seeing. The admission carried the weight of shame. Sarah recognized it, the compromise between conscience and survival that ordinary people sometimes had to make. Diane Mercer was not a criminal, but she had allowed herself to become complicit through silence. I understand your position, Sarah said, but now you have a chance to make it right. Tell me everything you know about Marcus Webb and this operation. Over the next hour, Diane provided details that painted a disturbing picture. Marcus Webb had been at Grady Memorial for 15 years, a respected figure in the emergency department with connections throughout the hospital. He had cultivated relationships with staff members who were vulnerable, financially desperate or personally troubled, and recruited them into his network. The operation was sophisticated, spreading the theft across multiple departments to avoid triggering any single alarm. The stolen medications were moved out of the hospital through various means, hidden in personal belongings during shift changes, tucked into laundry bins destined for external processing, even smuggled out through delivery vehicles that came and went constantly. The thermal bag Sarah found was just one node in a system designed to be resilient, able to continue operating even if one pathway was compromised. Who else is involved? Sarah asked. Diane shook her head. I only know what I have observed. Marcus is careful. He compartmentalizes everything. The people doing the actual stealing probably do not know each other. Sarah thanked Diane and had an officer escort her to a secure location for further questioning. The investigation had expanded significantly, but they were still missing the complete picture. Marcus Webb was the key, but approaching him required caution. If he realized the operation was compromised, he might destroy evidence or flee. She found Max waiting patiently outside the conference room, his tail wagging slightly at her appearance. Good boy, she murmured, scratching behind his ears. We have more work to do. The emergency department was the hospital's most chaotic environment. A constant stream of ambulances, walk-in patients and medical staff responding to crises large and small. Sarah and Max entered through a side corridor, avoiding the main waiting area where anxious families sat beneath flickering television screens. Marcus Webb was not difficult to locate. He stood near the nurses' station, a tall man with broad shoulders and an authoritative presence that commanded the space around him. He was directing staff with calm efficiency, the picture of professional competence. Nothing in his demeanor suggested he was running a criminal enterprise worth potentially millions of dollars. Sarah approached carefully, Max at her heel. Mr. Webb? He turned, his expression shifting smoothly from focus to curiosity. Yes, can I help you? Lieutenant Collins, Atlanta PD. I need a few minutes of your time. Something flickered in his eyes, too brief to identify before the professional mask reasserted itself. Of course. What is this about? We are conducting a security assessment. Hospital administration asked us to interview department supervisors as part of the process. Webb nodded, his posture relaxed. Certainly, we can use my office. He led them through the emergency department to a small office overlooking the trauma bay. The space was neat, organized, diplomas and certifications displayed on one wall, photographs of Webb with various hospital officials on another. A man who had built his career carefully, cultivating an image of competence and reliability. Max's behavior changed as they entered the office. His nose worked the air, his body tensing almost imperceptibly. Sarah noticed but gave no outward sign, settling into the chair Webb offered while keeping her expression neutral. "What would you like to know?" Webb asked, sitting behind his desk with the ease of someone accustomed to interviews. Sarah began with routine questions about emergency department operations, medication protocols, staff management. Webb answered smoothly, his responses polished and professional. He had clearly given similar explanations many times to administrators, auditors, and presumably investigators who had come before without finding anything amiss. As they talked, Max moved slowly around the office, his search appearing casual but actually systematic. He paused near a filing cabinet, sniffed, moved on. He investigated a coat rack, a bookshelf, a small refrigerator in the corner. Webb watched the dog with apparent amusement. "Impressive animal," he said. "How long have you two been partners?" 7 years, Sarah replied. "He is the best I have ever worked with. I imagine a dog like that can find almost anything." Sarah met his eyes. Almost anything. The moment stretched between them, a silent acknowledgement that both understood more than they were saying. Then Webb smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "Well, I hope your assessment goes smoothly. We run a tight operation here. Anything you need, just ask." Sarah thanked him and rose to leave. As she reached the door, she paused. "One more thing. Do you know a nurse named Diane Mercer?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Webb's composure held, but Sarah caught the micro-expression, the brief tightening around his eyes that betrayed recognition. "The name sounds familiar," he said carefully. "We have hundreds of nurses. I cannot keep track of everyone. She works the night shift in the East Wing. She mentioned speaking with you recently about some concerns." Webb shrugged. "People bring concerns to supervisors all the time. It is part of the job." Sarah nodded slowly. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Webb." In the corridor outside, she paused to assess the situation. Webb was suspicious now, aware that the investigation was closing in. He would move quickly to protect himself, which meant they needed to move faster. She keyed her radio, connecting to the detective coordinating the backup teams. "I need surveillance on Marcus Webb, emergency department supervisor. Do not approach, just observe. And get me access to his personnel file, financial records, phone records, everything we can legally obtain." The response was affirmative. Sarah continued through the hospital, Max ranging ahead, following the invisible map of sense that told him stories humans could not perceive. They found their next lead in an unexpected place. Max alerted near a staff break room on the 4th floor, his posture indicating another positive hit. Sarah investigated and discovered a messenger bag tucked behind a couch, containing more medication vials along with cash, approximately $5,000 in small bills. The bag belonged to a pharmacy technician named Carlos Reyes, according to the ID badge clipped to its strap. Sarah had him located and brought to the same conference room where she had questioned Diane. Unlike the nurse, Carlos was young, nervous, and clearly terrified. "I did not want to do this," he said before Sarah could even begin her questions. "Webb made me. He said he would get me fired, destroy my career. I have student loans, my parents depend on me. I could not afford to lose my job." Sarah let him talk, watching the confession spill out in a rush of fear and relief. Carlos painted a picture consistent with what Diane had described. Webb identifying vulnerable employees, applying pressure, building a network of reluctant participants who were too afraid to refuse and too ashamed to report what they were doing. "How many people are involved?" Sarah asked. Carlos shook his head. "I do not know all of them. Webb keeps everyone separate. I collect medications from the pharmacy, leave them in designated spots. Someone else moves them. I never see who. Where are these designated spots?" "Throughout the hospital. Utility closets, storage rooms, even some patient rooms that are kept empty for overflow. The locations change regularly." "And the money?" "Payment for my role. It is not much, considering the risk, but Webb says we are all in this together, that we protect each other." Sarah had Carlos provide a list of every drop location he knew, then turned him over to detectives for further questioning. The investigation was building momentum, but Webb remained the primary target. Without him, the network might simply reconstitute under new leadership. She found a quiet alcove and checked her phone. Messages from the surveillance team indicated that Webb had not left the emergency department, though he had made several phone calls from his office. The detectives were working to obtain records that would reveal who he had contacted. Max pressed against her leg, sensing her tension. Sarah reached down to stroke his head, drawing comfort from the connection. They had been working for hours, the night deepening around them as the hospital continued its endless cycle of care and crisis. Her radio crackled. "Lieutenant, we have a situation. Webb is on the move. He is heading toward the parking garage." Sarah was running before the message finished. She and Max sprinted through corridors, dodging startled staff members, taking stairs rather than waiting for elevators. The parking garage was on the building's west side, a multi-level structure that served employees and visitors. They burst through a fire door onto the garage's second level, the concrete space echoing with their footsteps. Sarah spotted Webb immediately, moving quickly toward a sedan parked near the exit ramp. He carried a briefcase that had not been in his office earlier. "Webb, Atlanta Police, stop where you are." He turned, saw her, and made a calculation that showed on his face. For a moment, Sarah thought he would surrender. Then he threw the briefcase and ran. Max was faster. Sarah released him with a single command, and the Belgian Malinois launched forward like a missile, closing the distance with breathtaking speed. Webb made it perhaps 20 feet before Max overtook him, the dog positioning himself in front of the fleeing man, barking sharply, blocking the escape route without making contact. Webb stumbled to a halt, raising his hands. The confrontation had lasted seconds. Sarah approached with her weapon drawn, though she did not expect to need it. Webb's expression had shifted from desperation to resignation, the look of someone who had gambled and lost. "Marcus Webb, you are under arrest for theft of controlled substances and conspiracy to distribute. You have the right to remain silent." She recited the Miranda warning while backup officers arrived to complete the arrest. The briefcase, recovered from where Webb had thrown it, contained more medications along with documents that would later prove crucial to unraveling the full scope of the operation. As officers led Webb away, Sarah knelt beside Max, who was still alert, still ready for whatever came next. She pulled a treat from her vest pocket and offered it to him, watching his tail wag with satisfaction. "You did good, partner," she said quietly. "Really good." The next several hours were consumed by the methodical work of building a case. Sarah coordinated with detectives, prosecutors, and hospital administrators, ensuring that evidence was properly collected and documented. The lockdown was maintained until every known drop location had been searched, yielding more contraband and more evidence of the network's reach. By dawn, the scope of the operation had become clear. Webb had been running his scheme for over 3 years, recruiting more than a dozen employees across multiple departments. The stolen medications had a street value exceeding $2 million, funneled to distributors who sold them throughout the Southeast. The network had connections to larger criminal organizations, though those threads would require separate investigations to follow. Sarah finally emerged from the hospital as the sun crept above the Atlanta skyline, painting the city in shades of gold and orange. The heat was already building, promising another sweltering day, but she barely noticed. Exhaustion had settled into her bones, the kind that came from sustained concentration and the adrenaline crash that followed. Max walked beside her, his energy finally flagging after the long night. They had worked together for years, through countless operations and investigations, and she knew his rhythms as well as her own. He needed rest, food, and a chance to decompress. So did she. She loaded him into the SUV, made sure his water bowl was full, and sat for a moment in the driver's seat, watching the hospital through the windshield. The building looked different in daylight, less imposing, more like what it was supposed to be, a place of healing. The people inside were mostly good people, dedicating their lives to helping others. The corruption they had uncovered was an aberration, not the norm. Her phone buzzed with a text from the precinct commander. "Excellent work. Take the day, debrief tomorrow." Sarah smiled tiredly and started the engine. The drive home was quiet, the city coming alive around her as rush hour began. She navigated through increasingly heavy traffic, her mind already beginning to process and file the night's events. At her apartment, she went through the familiar routine, feeding Max, checking his paws for any injuries, making sure he had fresh water. He ate quickly, then collapsed onto his bed with a contented sigh. Within minutes, he was asleep, his legs twitching as he dreamed of chases and searches. Sarah showered, changed into comfortable clothes, and made herself breakfast. The normalcy of the actions helped ground her, reminding her that life existed beyond the intensity of investigations. She ate standing at the kitchen counter, watching the morning news without really seeing it. The case would generate significant attention, she knew. Hospital drug theft was a story that resonated with the public, touching on fears about healthcare security and the opioid crisis. There would be press conferences, statements from the department and hospital administration, probably some political grandstanding. Sarah would participate as required, but her focus would already be shifting to the next case, the next challenge. She finished eating and cleaned up, then sat on the couch with a cup of coffee, finally allowing herself to relax. Max continued sleeping, his presence a comfort, even in unconsciousness. They had done good work tonight. People who preyed on the vulnerable, who exploited their positions of trust, had been stopped. It was not everything, but it was something. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call from Detective Morrison, who had been leading the evidence processing. "Collins," he said when she answered. "Thought you would want to know. We found Webb's records. He kept detailed logs of everything. Every theft, every payment, every distributor. It is a prosecutor's dream." "That is good news," Sarah said. "What about the other employees, the ones he recruited? Most of them are cooperating fully, scared, ashamed, eager to make deals. Webb picked them carefully, people who would not fight back. The DA is working out arrangements for the ones who were genuinely coerced. And the distributors? We are building cases now. Webb's records give us names, locations, transaction dates. This is going to ripple through the whole regional drug trade." Sarah felt a grim satisfaction. Good. Keep me posted. She ended the call and set the phone aside. The investigation would continue without her for now, other officers picking up the threads she had identified. That was how it worked in a department this size. Cases handed off and built upon, each officer contributing their expertise. Max stirred, lifting his head to look at her with sleepy eyes. She patted the couch cushion beside her, and he hauled himself up to join her, resting his head on her lap with a contented grumble. She stroked his fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. They had earned this rest, this moment of peace before the next call came. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the morning light warm her face, and allowed herself to simply be present. The city hummed outside her window, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, an endless tapestry of human experience. In a hospital across town, patients were waking to another day of recovery. Doctors and nurses were beginning their shifts, picking up where their colleagues had left off. The institution continued its mission of healing, slightly cleaner now, slightly safer. It was not a perfect outcome, but it was a real one, tangible and meaningful. Sarah thought about Diane Mercer, the nurse who had stayed silent out of fear, but ultimately found the courage to speak. There would be consequences for her silence, professional and perhaps legal, but Sarah hoped they would be tempered by the recognition that she had helped when it mattered. People were complicated, capable of both cowardice and courage, often in the same situation. Judging them was easy. Understanding them was harder. Her phone buzzed one more time. A message from Captain Rodriguez, her commanding officer. Simple and direct. Well done. Sarah smiled and set the phone aside. Praise was nice, but it was not why she did this job. She did it because the work mattered. Because every investigation was a chance to tip the scales slightly toward justice. Because the alternative, allowing predators to operate unchecked, was unacceptable. Max shifted, settling more comfortably against her. His warmth was reassuring, a reminder that she was not alone in this work. They were a team, had been for years, and would continue to be until one of them could not serve anymore. The thought of that eventual ending was distant, something to be acknowledged but not dwelled upon. For now, there was this moment. Sunlight streaming through the window, a loyal partner sleeping peacefully, the satisfaction of a job well done. Sarah let herself sink into the couch, let her thoughts drift, let the exhaustion finally claim her. She woke several hours later to Max licking her face, his way of announcing that he needed to go outside. Sarah groaned, stretched, and hauled herself upright. The afternoon sun had shifted, filling the apartment with golden light that made everything look slightly unreal. She took Max for a walk around the block, letting him sniff every tree and fire hydrant with the intensity of a detective examining a crime scene. The heat was oppressive, the kind of thick humidity that made breathing feel like work, but she did not mind. After the controlled environment of the hospital, the outdoor air felt liberating. They returned to the apartment and Sarah checked her messages. Updates on the case, mostly administrative matters that could wait until tomorrow. One message stood out, a note from the hospital administrator thanking her for her professionalism and discretion during the operation. It was formal, probably drafted by a public relations team, but the sentiment seemed genuine. Sarah made dinner, something simple that required minimal thought, and ate while watching a documentary about marine life. Max lounged at her feet, occasionally lifting his head when something on screen caught his attention. The normalcy of the evening felt like a gift, a chance to decompress before returning to the intensity of active duty. Her mind kept returning to the case, analyzing decisions, considering what could have been done differently. It was a habit she had never been able to break, the constant evaluation that made her good at her job, but sometimes made relaxation difficult. Tonight, though, she found mostly satisfaction in the review. They had moved quickly, adapted to new information, secured evidence without letting the primary suspect escape. It was textbook work, the kind of operation that would be used as an example in training scenarios. The one element she kept circling back to was Webb's network. He had built something sophisticated, resilient, designed to survive individual failures. Even with him in custody, the infrastructure he created could be repurposed by someone else if they were not careful. The distributors they had identified were mid-level players at best. Somewhere higher in the chain, decisions were being made by people who had never set foot in Grady Memorial Hospital. Those investigations would continue, handled by specialized units with resources Sarah's team did not have. Her role was to identify the local source, gather evidence, and pass it along. The bigger picture was someone else's responsibility. It was frustrating sometimes, knowing that you were only seeing one piece of a larger puzzle, but it was also necessary. No single officer could track every thread, follow every lead. The work required collaboration, trust in colleagues you might never meet. She finished dinner and cleaned up, then settled back on the couch with a book she had been trying to read for weeks. Max curled up beside her, his breathing deepening as he drifted back to sleep. The apartment was quiet, peaceful, a sanctuary from the chaos of the streets. Sarah read until her eyes grew heavy, then set the book aside and turned off the lights. She made one final check of the apartment, the habitual security sweep that she performed every night without conscious thought, and climbed into bed. Max followed, settling into his usual spot at the foot of the mattress. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless, the restorative kind that the body demanded after prolonged stress. Sarah did not wake until her alarm sounded the next morning. Pulling her back to consciousness with the insistent beeping that signaled another day had begun. The debrief at the precinct was thorough, lasting most of the morning. Sarah walked the assembled officers through the operation from initial contact to Webb's arrest, highlighting key decisions and their outcomes. Captain Rodriguez observed from the back of the room, his expression unreadable, but his attention complete. When she finished, there were questions from colleagues, clarifications about procedures and evidence handling. Sarah answered them all patiently, understanding that these debriefs served multiple purposes: documentation, training, and the institutional memory that allowed the department to improve over time. Afterward, Rodriguez called her into his office. He was a large man, imposing in the way that came from decades of physical and political battles within the department. But his eyes were kind, and he treated his officers with respect they did not always receive elsewhere. "Solid work, Collins," he said. "The DA is already preparing charges. Webb is looking at decades if convicted." "His network," Sarah said. "We identified local participants, but the distribution side is still murky." Rodriguez nodded. "Federal agencies are interested. We are coordinating with DEA and FBI. This thing is bigger than Atlanta." Sarah had expected as much. "Will we be involved in the follow-up?" "Tangentially. They will want your testimony, access to evidence, maybe some consultation. But the heavy lifting will be federal jurisdiction now." There was no bitterness in the words, just practical acknowledgement of how these cases evolved. Sarah had worked with federal agencies before, knew the protocols and the politics. Her role would diminish as the investigation expanded, but the foundation she had built would remain essential. "Take a few days," Rodriguez continued. "You have earned it. We will call you if anything urgent comes up." Sarah thanked him and left, collecting Max from the K-9 facility where he had been waiting during the debrief. The dog greeted her with enthusiasm, tail wagging, ready for whatever came next. She loaded him into the SUV and sat for a moment, considering her options. The city spread out before her, a maze of possibilities. She could go home, continue resting, catch up on the life maintenance that always fell behind during intense cases. Or she could drive, let the motion clear her head, remind herself why she loved this work. She chose to drive. Through downtown, past the gleaming towers of commerce and government, into neighborhoods where the wealth faded and the struggles became more visible. Atlanta was a city of contrasts, prosperity and poverty existing side by side, sometimes on the same block. The hospital they had just cleaned out served everyone, from the executives in the towers to the homeless gathered beneath overpasses. Sarah thought about the medications that had been stolen, where they would have ended up if the operation had continued unchecked. Opioids had devastated communities across the country, creating addictions that destroyed families and killed thousands every year. Every vial they had recovered was someone not getting high, not overdosing, not becoming another statistic. It was a small victory in a much larger war, but small victories accumulated. They had to. The alternative was despair, the crushing weight of problems too large to solve. You focused on what you could control, the cases in front of you, the people you could help, the justice you could deliver. Everything else was noise. Max rode in the back, watching the city pass with alert interest. 7 years they had been together, and she still marveled at his capabilities. The sense he could detect, the behaviors he could predict, the loyalty he showed without reservation. Dogs had been partners to humans for thousands of years, and the bond had only grown stronger as both species evolved. She thought about retirement sometimes, wondered what would come after the badge and the gun. Max would retire before her, his working life shorter by the nature of his physiology. When that day came, he would live out his years as a civilian, sleeping on the couch, chasing squirrels in the yard, enjoying a peace he had earned through service. But that day was not today. Today they were still partners, still capable of doing the work that mattered. Sarah found comfort in that certainty. the knowledge that purpose and meaning were accessible whenever she needed them. She drove to a park on the city's east side, a green oasis amid the urban sprawl. Max leaped out of the SUV with obvious delight, immediately beginning to explore the unfamiliar territory. Sarah walked the paths with him, letting him sniff and investigate while she enjoyed the simple pleasure of being outdoors. Other dog owners nodded as they passed, recognizing a fellow traveler. A few children pointed at Max with excitement, though Sarah kept enough distance to avoid requests for petting. He was off duty now, but the harness was still packed in the SUV, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. They stayed at the park for an hour, until the heat became too intense even for the shade. Sarah drove home, fed Max, and spent the afternoon handling mundane tasks: bills, laundry, the accumulated detritus of a life often interrupted by work. It was tedious but necessary, the infrastructure that allowed everything else to function. That evening, she received a call from Morrison. They had completed the initial processing of Webb's records and found something unexpected: evidence suggesting that the hospital operation was just one of several he had been running. Similar networks appeared to exist at 2 other medical facilities in the region, using the same methods and some of the same distributors. "The scope just tripled," Morrison said. "We are going to need a lot more resources." Sarah listened as he outlined the emerging picture. Webb was not just a corrupt hospital supervisor. He was an architect, someone who had designed a replicable system for pharmaceutical theft and implemented it across multiple institutions. The federal interest Rodriguez had mentioned suddenly made more sense. "Where do we stand on the other facilities?" Sarah asked. "We are coordinating with their security departments, trying to determine if the networks are still active. Webb's arrest might have spooked the participants, or they might not know yet that he is in custody. Do you need me to come in?" Morrison hesitated. "Not tonight. But tomorrow, yes. We are going to need your expertise on how this operates from the inside." Sarah agreed and ended the call. The case had grown beyond what she had anticipated, but that was not unusual. Criminal operations rarely existed in isolation. Pull one thread, and you often found it connected to a dozen others. She thought about the people involved, the employees at those other hospitals who might be participating in theft, just as Carlos Reyes had. Scared, desperate, pressured into compliance by someone who knew how to exploit vulnerability. They were victims too, in a sense, though that did not absolve them of responsibility. The criminal justice system would sort out who deserved punishment and who deserved leniency. Max sensed her preoccupation and pressed against her leg, offering comfort without understanding the source of her concern. She scratched behind his ears, grateful for the simple affection. The next morning brought new challenges. Sarah arrived at the precinct to find a coordination center being established. Representatives from multiple agencies gathering to share information and plan strategies. The conference room was crowded with people, federal badges mixing with local law enforcement, everyone speaking in the shorthand of their respective organizations. Rodriguez introduced her to Special Agent Thornton from the DEA, a sharp-eyed woman who seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy. "Lieutenant Collins," Thornton said, shaking her hand firmly, "your work at Grady Memorial is impressive. You identified the linchpin of a major distribution network." Sarah accepted the compliment modestly. "We got lucky with the timing. Another few hours, and Webb might have moved the medications out. Luck favors the prepared." Thornton said, "I have reviewed your reports. The methodology you employed, using K-9 resources for systematic search while maintaining operational security, was textbook. We would like to replicate it at the other facilities." The discussion that followed was detailed and technical. They planned coordinated operations at the 2 other hospitals Webb's records had identified, timing the actions to prevent suspects from warning each other. Sarah would lead one of the teams, her experience at Grady Memorial making her the natural choice. Max sat patiently throughout the briefing, occasionally drawing admiring glances from federal agents who recognized quality when they saw it. He was part of the plan too, his abilities essential for locating hidden contraband. 3 days later, they executed the operations. Sarah and Max hit Memorial Health Center on the south side of the city, while another team addressed Piedmont Regional to the north. The synchronized timing worked as intended, catching participants off guard before they could destroy evidence or flee. At Memorial, Max located 2 stashes of diverted medications, one in a supply closet similar to what they had found at Grady, another hidden in a maintenance tunnel used by facilities staff. 4 employees were arrested, all of them fitting the profile Webb favored: financially stressed, professionally vulnerable, easily manipulated. The Piedmont operation was equally successful, netting 3 more participants and substantial evidence. By the end of the day, Webb's network had been effectively dismantled, its participants in custody or identified for follow-up investigation. The distributors remained at large, but their supply chain had been severed. Thornton sought Sarah out after the debrief, genuine appreciation evident in her expression. "This is the kind of outcome we rarely achieve," she said. "Comprehensive, coordinated, almost no loose ends. Your department should be proud." Sarah nodded, accepting the praise while deflecting credit to the team. "It was a group effort. Lots of people contributed." "True, but you set the standard. The initial work at Grady Memorial established the template. Everything else followed from that." They shook hands, and Thornton returned to her federal colleagues. Sarah found Max waiting in the K-9 area, his tail wagging at her approach. She knelt beside him, letting his enthusiastic greeting wash over her. "We did it, partner," she murmured. "We really did it." The following weeks brought the inevitable administrative aftermath. Reports to write, testimony to prepare, court appearances to schedule. Webb and his co-conspirators moved through the legal system, their fates now in the hands of prosecutors and judges. The evidence was overwhelming. Plea deals were expected for most participants, with Webb facing the full weight of prosecution given his leadership role. Sarah returned to regular duty, new cases demanding her attention as the city's criminal activity continued unabated. A robbery spree in the western districts, a missing person case that resolved tragically, a drug bust that led to a shootout. Though fortunately, no officers were injured. The work never stopped, an endless conveyor of human conflict and suffering. Through it all, Max remained her constant companion. His skills were called upon regularly, his success rate maintaining the reputation that made him a legend within the K-9 unit. Younger handlers sometimes asked Sarah for advice, wanting to understand the partnership that made their team so effective. "Trust," she always told them. "Trust his instincts. Trust your training. Trust each other. Everything else follows from that." It was simple advice, but the truth often was. The bond between handler and dog could not be manufactured or accelerated. It had to be built, day by day, operation by operation, until the communication became instinctive, almost telepathic. One evening, several months after the hospital case concluded, Sarah received an invitation to speak at a regional law enforcement conference. The topic was pharmaceutical diversion and the role of K-9 units in detection. She considered declining, uncomfortable with the spotlight, but Rodriguez encouraged her to accept. "It matters, Collins," he said. "Other departments need to know what works. Your experience could save lives." So she went, accompanied by Max, and stood before an audience of officers from across the Southeast. She spoke about the Grady Memorial case, the challenges of operating in a complex environment, the importance of patience and adaptability. Max sat beside the podium, his presence adding weight to her words. Afterward, officers approached with questions and thanks. Many had dealt with similar problems in their jurisdictions. Pharmaceutical theft a growing concern as opioid addiction continued to devastate communities. Sarah shared what insights she could, encouraging cooperation and resource sharing. The conference ended, and she drove home through the familiar streets of Atlanta. The city had changed during her years of service, grown and shifted in ways both visible and subtle. But its essential nature remained the same, a place of opportunity and challenge, where millions of people struggled to build lives amid forces they could not always control. Sarah pulled into her apartment complex and sat for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Max waited patiently in the back, his breathing steady, his presence a comfort. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. The work never ended, but that was okay. It was the work she had chosen, the purpose she had found, the life she had built. And she would keep doing it, one case at a time, one day at a time until she could not anymore. She opened the door, and Max leaped out to stand beside her. Together they walked toward home, two partners in an endless mission, bound by loyalty and purpose and the simple truth that justice was worth fighting for. The night was quiet, peaceful, a rare gift in a city that never truly slept. Sarah appreciated the moment, let it fill her with something like contentment. Then she unlocked her door, let Max bound inside, and began preparing for whatever came next. Because that was who she was, a guardian, a hunter, a seeker of truth. And as long as there was work to be done, she would do it.